Well, good morning, everyone. Just to begin, I think historically when we get to this time in the calendar, we usually have accomplished a lot in our off season, or we feel like that what we've already done is preparing ourselves for the upcoming season. And obviously this off season has been very different from that. From a player acquisition standpoint, it's been very slow. And part of that is, as we discussed at the GM meetings, winter meetings, there is the elephant in the room in the sense of, will we have the ability to move Nolan? And obviously, up till January 18th, we still haven't been able to accomplish that, and that has slowed or in effect, affected how we were going after trying to really round out this roster. When we focus on the roster itself, obviously the theme is going to be about creating opportunity, giving some of our younger players that runway, that chance to really see what we have. We certainly don't want to go down that path where we start trying to move some people and then we look back and regret that. So this year, this offseason has been very different, but as we go into 2025, I keep reminding myself that the offseason is not over. There's still time. Obviously, by the time we get to Jupiter and open up camp, we would like to have some closure, but that's not to say we will. We're going to have to be patient throughout the next 8 to 10 weeks to see where it gets us. But hopefully, when we do get to where we think we need to be, and we're able to create that opportunity, the team that we put out on that field is going to be something that you guys actually are excited about. You're excited to see what they can do. And, when you break it down into the individual side of things, it is about people taking advantage of this opportunity and running with it. And so from an overall standpoint, we like our starting pitching. We would like to do some things in our bullpen if we can before we get to camp, or maybe more importantly, get to opening day. But time will tell if we're able to accomplish that. So at this time, I'll open it up to questions, but just remind yourself, there's still the off season. So thank you.
Well, is there a point where you feel you need to have clarity with Nolan? You kind of alluded to it there, that he may come to camp and you could still be looking to trade him, or if he comes to camp, do you expect him to be a Cardinal? Is there any sort of sense of clarity there?
No, there's not, and nor do I think we have to have one. It is something that I think in time he and I will have to talk through of if the reality is he's going to have to join us in camp and then what that looks like. But for now, it's I'd like to say business as usual, but it's not been business as usual. It's been very different, but we'll continue to try to find a place that he's happy with, and we'll use our time as best we can on that.
Do you have a figure in mind for how much you need to carve out of the payroll before you can then make some of the moves on free agents, like you're talking about with bullpen?
Not really. I'm not, as I stated at the end of the season, that our payroll is going down. But I do feel like we do have a little bandwidth if we need to. But I think, the big question is really, what's that trade look like? And so earlier in the offseason, we had an opportunity to perhaps do something. And from a financial standpoint, I do think it would have been very helpful for us. But here we are. So I'm going to continue to try to find a mirror image of that type of deal if possible. But, not saying that's going to happen.
Do you have a sense of what in the market has been holding up that process, why it's been so difficult to find a fit?
I would imagine the free agent market is what's slowing that down. In a lot of ways, that's sort of what I anticipated early on would be, depending on where he goes, maybe the underbidders might have more interest.
A two-part question for you, if you will. Is there a way where you're preparing for a scenario in which Nolan does come to spring training? Would you be open to trading him during the spring if that opportunity arises? And if he is here, how does that impact the runway that you had planned for some of the younger players?
Well, let's start with the second part first. It would definitely affect some of the projected at-bats that we were anticipating for some of those younger players. That's not to say we can't achieve those, because the DH, and there's other ways to accomplish it. But clearly it would change how we were thinking about our actual infield. In terms of would we be open to doing something in camp, when a player has a no trade, they have a lot of say in this. So, I can say something, but it really is something that he and I will have to discuss. And if he'd be open to that, if something were to arise, I imagine like there's the mental side of this too, right? Like he's probably thinking like, okay, if I have to come to camp, I want to start preparing for that. And maybe he wants to be committed to that at that point. So I don't want to speak for him at this point because we have not discussed that. But clearly, as we get closer to Jupiter, that is something we will have to touch on.
Well, you mentioned in winter meetings that if you can't move him, you have to get creative. Is there a scenario where he could be back and you try to do other things?
I could, or we could, yes. Don't really love that idea in the sense because really feel like we have some depth in our rotation right now, so I really don't want to like start tearing away from that. In terms of thinking about moving a position player to try to achieve some financial goals would be something we could consider as well, but really don't want to. So the hope is that we can achieve goal number one and then react from there.
Well, it's similar to what John Denton just asked. Obviously, if you trade Arenado, it provides more opportunities at bats for younger players. Can you explain also how it unlocks trading with Arenado? What does that unlock for you? What ability does that give you financially with the minor league development and stuff like that?
Well, in the minor league development, nothing. We are moving full force on that, regardless of any trades. But it does give us some financial flexibility on perhaps adding to areas that we weren't able to do so far. So obviously bullpen, if we decided to look for a right-handed bat with some thump, something like that. But it really just gives us some financial relief in a stressful environment right now. So, that's just something we're trying to work through. And, needless to say, if we can achieve it, I think we'll be in a better spot.
Well, how do you view the opportunity for younger players as it pertains to the rotation? You've got several veterans that are sort of in there, but as you've seen in recent years, you need more than 5 arms to get through a season. Is that sort of how you guys are viewing it, that the rotation is going to be stocked by veterans, but the depth is going to be maybe made up of some of those younger guys?
Well, I definitely think as we get into camp, McGreevy is going to be competing for a spot. But you could argue some of those spots are already taken by veteran players, but historically, some of those players haven't been able to go pole to pole in post. So, I think the depth of what we have in our rotation is something that we feel good about and would like to keep that if possible.
Well, when you sat up there at the end of the season and kind of laid out how the winter was going to look, and y'all talked about the reset, did you expect on January 18th to have more dramatic changes to the roster than you've had? I mean, at that point in time, you were talking about you have to reach out to Sonny, you have to reach out to Wilson, you have to reach out to Nolan. Now they're all still on the roster, and the only changes are really free agents.
True. I did anticipate us probably having completed a trade by now, but that hasn't happened.
Just the one, or did you expect more dramatic changes?
I went into that open-minded. I didn't know what they were going to say to me, but early feedback was those guys want to be a part of what we're doing. They like our young core, and so I wasn't surprised when they decided they wanted to be a part of this.
Does that slow or change the organization's goal to get younger to dive into the development?
Not really. Obviously, taking Wilson and moving him to first, we would have had to fill that regardless, right? So you're still getting those younger guys the opportunity to catch. It's not putting a block on somebody like a Crooks in any form. And in terms of really the group of young players we're referring to at the moment, they're the guys that we really want to see step up and run with this. So I don't think anybody's getting blocked at the moment.
Well, you've talked about in St. Louis, you never were able to really rebuild or reset. How different is this, instead of chasing that 12th championship and, really looking at player development, really focusing on giving these guys an opportunity, how different is this mindset?
Well, I think strategically, it's been very different. It's the first time in my career that we're sitting up here in the middle of January and like literally have done nothing for the roster at this point. So that part has been an adjustment. It's not to say that our offseason wasn't busy because rethinking our player development and bringing in new faces and new hires, that takes time. And so from that standpoint, I think it's been a success. And, hopefully we start to see returns on that quickly.
Well, how would you kind of gauge your own confidence that you'll be able to find a deal that makes sense for you all and for Nolan, having seen as much of the market as you have?
Well, I'm hopeful. When you say confident or putting odds on it, it's, I think still a flip of a coin. But, I know that's a top priority for the organization and myself. So I'll be laser focused on it until it's not.
Mo, you said you were going to open-minded with some of the conversations you had with those veteran guys. What do you feel like you learned about specifically Wilson and Sonny with the way they reacted to those conversations?
Well, I think there's that loyalty of wanting to be a part of something. And, it could have been very easy for either one of them to say, hey, yeah, move me. And I think it would have been pretty easy to move them. Both were asked about often. So from that standpoint, I kind of felt great that this is something that they still believe in, and they still believe in their peers in that clubhouse, and they think there's a chance that we're going to be more successful than people think we will be. So that part was cool.
Mo, do you see teams that might pivot after Sasaki gets off the market last night? Would that interest in some of the rotation depth interest you enough to tap into that to make a move?
I do think teams will now pivot because of that. So in terms of us giving up some of our starters at this moment, I don't really want to, for what I said earlier about trying to keep that depth and go into the season with that type of protection. I think would be great because as we all know, if you go in with 5, you're going to be short.
Have you had recent conversations with Nolan? I know it can be exhausting to keep beating this point, but it does feel like whether he stays or doesn't is the linchpin of this offseason.
Well, it is a linchpin, but there's nothing I can do to move it faster. Last time I spoke with him would have been pre-holidays. I do keep his agent up to date, if you will, not regularly, but periodically. And, right now I think, we are in a holding pattern, and, all I ask is for a little patience on this, because there's just, regardless of what I want to do or the team wants to do, that's just not how it works.
The deal that you all had put together that ended up getting done, were you surprised that wasn't a place that no one was willing to go? Kind of how did that play out from your seat?
Yeah, I was a little surprised, but things happen. I think looking back at that, I think when Tucker was traded, so it was almost more like order of operation. Had we been a few days ahead of that, I think there would have been no. Here we are, but so yeah, things happen.
Has all this changed your opinion about giving no trade clauses?
Yes and no. Okay, let's start with the yes. I mean, obviously, it can be frustrating when you are trying to achieve something, but you're a little bit handcuffed on really what the player wants to do or has interest in. But part of the history of the no trade, dates back to the early 2000s, probably even going back to like Mark McGuire, where players were wanting to be here in St. Louis, were willing to take what was perceived at below market, but for the security of knowing that they were going to be in one place. And it's not to say during that time period a player might not ask to be moved. You think back to my first year as general manager. I think I was named on October 31st, and I think November 1st, Scott Rowland called me and said he wanted out. Subsequently, a couple weeks later, Jim Edmonds calls me and tells me he wants out. Both had no trades. Both, prior to that, seemed very happy in St. Louis. But so things do happen along those lines. But historically, usually when we give those no trades in the past, they've worked out for us.
Mo, what would you describe your relationship with Nolan like right now? And if he does report to camp and you do have to go into the season, what do you anticipate that relationship and dynamic being like with the organization? organization in the clubhouse?
Oh, I think it'll be fine. I mean, he knows that we're trying, and he knows that he's going to have to try. So I don't. That part doesn't scare me at all.
I was gonna follow with the no trade thing, so I mean, I guess sometimes in those situations, it takes that agreement to make the deal, right? And that's part of the negotiations of signing the guy, is that they ask for it, that you offer.
Right. I mean, there have been some multi-year deals in recent years. We haven't done the no trade, but I mean, obviously, if you want ultimate roster flexibility, avoid giving no trades.
Have you gotten to the point where you've had to have a conversation with Joel, like maybe this needs to be a bigger list? Are you all at that stage of it? How does that process work? Like, if you have an idea of where Nolan will say yes, as it to, hey, it needs to be a bigger list?
You know, it's something we've talked about, but not something we've demanded yet.
Well, is there a demand from teams for you guys to pay some of Nolan's salary? I know you don't like discussing details of a strategy, but is
So why are you asking me that?
Just to see if you answer.
I'm not going to then. Drawing a line in the sand on that one.
Just with Brian Helsey, I mean, you guys came to an agreement to avoid arbitration. I mean, what have the conversations been like with him and just kind of his future with this team?
You know, obviously, I'm going into my last year, and so a lot of what we think about in terms of like strategically in years 26, 27, and beyond, that's something that, you know, from an ownership standpoint, want them weighing in, getting Chaim's opinion on what he thinks. But my ultimate goal was to try to create a pretty clean slate for my successor and the new management team, and so they would have the ability to do really whatever they wanted to do. And so obviously you inherit some contracts are already existing, but for the most part I think they'll have a lot more roster flexibility in those out years, and that's been the goal here.
As Chaim has taken a look at things over the last year, and as you all have had conversations with that group, was an approach to arbitration something that he came back with as something you all could change? It seems to stand out that the three guys where there were no agreements were the three first-year guys. Is that a change at all you all made internally?
No.
Okay.
No, that was just couldn't have a meeting of the minds.
Well, the emphasis for scaling back payroll, how much of that is clearing the books like you had mentioned for the next group, or how much of that, I mean, like, people have heard obviously the investment in minor league and all of that, and they equate the two. What else goes into that? Because obviously the TV contract,
Yeah, I would say, like, from a very high level, it's your revenue. So if revenue goes down, typically you have to manage your expenses. And as we're investing in other areas of the club, we're going to continue to do that. But I don't think, you know, like when you take the long view of where this is going, I do anticipate at some point you're going to see payroll go back up. This ownership group understands that payroll does matter in terms of, you know, ultimately competing for the big prize. And I think as we do this reset, it allows us to sort of catch up on the development side of things. But hopefully when that's running full throttle, then we can time the payroll with it. And so that's ultimately what we hope to see.
Two quick questions. Can you put a dollar figure or a percentage increase in what you're doing at the minor league level, at the player development level, where that stands?
Percentage increase, I'd say it's roughly probably been 20 to 25%.
Okay, and that includes like the salaries of the staff?
Exactly.
Infrastructure.
That's net, like, overall.
What would go into that? Would it be facilities in addition to staff, new tech?
Facilities would not be part of that calculus, but it would be salaries, it would be technology, and but it's mostly human capital, head count.
Okay. And then this off season, have you had offers out to free agents, or have you had that entirely stopped by the looking for trades?
I have not made any aggressive offers on free agents. I had some conversations with free agents, but to that extent, obviously, as we talked about earlier, we need to do something first before we can do something else.
So it's not that they've chosen otherwise, it's just that you're not in the spot where you can make an offer?
Right.
So, was a pitch ultimately made to Roki Sasaki? Obviously, he didn't sign with the Cardinals, but
Really?
how aggressive? How far along did those talks go?
We knew early on that we were not a landing spot for him, so we did not put a lot of energy into what that would look like. Obviously, we dreamt about it. We thought it'd be super cool, but we were realistic and knew that wasn't going to happen.
Mo, how has your outlook for the payroll for 2025 changed, if at all, from where we were at the end of last season to where things stand today?
I would say it's the same. I think, Mr. DeWitt's giving me a little flexibility because, we haven't been able to accomplish what we thought we would by now. So he's being very understandable on what that might look like. So I don't feel like enormous pressure because I think like what we were able to do right after the season, we got to at least a zone where we felt comfortable with.
Along those lines, what Brandon just asked, if you, for some reason, can't pull off the Arenado trade, does that mean you must move somebody else on a big contract in order to?
I don't think so. No, I don't think it's a must. Would it be helpful? Yes, but I don't want to like just tear this apart for the sake of just trying to get to a number.
How do you balance that, though, when it comes to, because you've been very clear, reset, this is not a rebuild, and there's still the type of talent around to, guys, take a step forward, you're competitive this year. How have you kind of gone about mentally balancing that? Obviously, maybe not a lot tangibly that you've had to do toward that end so far, but keeping a lot of these veteran pitchers, you're talking in ways that say we want to be competitive still with what we have.
Well, I think you're asking me like on a personal level or emotionally how I've handled this. I guess you could say it's a very transactional type of mentality. I know like in the past, we've always looked at ways to augment our roster that we thought would get us to 90 wins, if not more. I'm still pretty optimistic about this current group. Now, hedging a lot of the bet on some of these younger players stepping forward, but I really think some of these young guys are very talented, and given the right opportunity and the right setting, they're going to be successful, and that's the play. Could I be wrong? Sure. But in doing so, I don't think we're being punitive to the organization by putting ourselves in a difficult financial position or having regrets with certain players that are still here.
Is it fair to say, like, looking at 2024 statistical performances of some of the guys that departed, you feel like you have guys that can step into roles and not necessarily lose a lot of ground in the standing, just not to declare that you're going to win division, but there's a range in which that's realistic based on kind of the calculus of that?
Yeah, so that would be like a very simplistic way to think about it, but we are thinking about it in terms of like player growth and players stepping up. And so I know a lot of our younger players have already been down in Jupiter, and that's really encouraging because they're investing in themselves. They're taking advantage of our spring training site, and that's great to see.
Well, with Quinn Matthews, big picture, can you describe what's so enticing about him to you and the staff, and just what his outlook looks like for the coming season?
Yeah, so that's obviously a young man that had a breakout year. You think about how quickly he elevated himself as a prospect to be named minor league pitcher of the year in all of minor leagues was great. He has that swing and miss ability, which is something that right now is very vogue in our game, and so he fits that. I think he's one of those guys that has a lot of confidence in what he's doing, and I think the sky's the limit for him. And it's nice to see someone from the left side doing it.
Well, there's been a pecking order, obviously, in how you would prefer to do deals. As we get closer to spring training, obviously, free agents want to sign too. It is a difficult position for you to be in. Will there be a time where you feel like you might have to pivot to the free agent market despite not having traded Nolan yet, or do those things remain in that order?
Yeah, I think priority 1, 2, and 3 is still Nolan.
Well, we got time for about one or two more, and we'll keep our trains on time here. We got Victor ready to go.
Vic's here?
Oh, yeah.
Hey, brother. I feel bad. You had to listen to this.
You talked about the young talent for next season. How much does Nolan Gorman and Jordan Walker kind of be a central piece if they can get back on track, if they can take steps forward that can help what you're talking about?
Absolutely, and I would throw in like Lars Newbar. Being able to post, being able to get 600 at bats. If those things happen, I think we'll be a pretty exciting offensive club.
Mo, you mentioned sometimes you get information about injuries or procedures that happen. Is there anything with the roster that's happened recently that we didn't know about yet regarding injuries?
Not that I'm aware of.
Well, after the sugar rush of the winter meetings when there were some signings, it's kind of been placid with free agents. Do you think Major League Baseball needs to think about changing that a little bit to change the calendar so that there isn't this lingering huge class of free agents with less than.
So almost like create like a signing period of sorts. Yeah, like you think about like the trading deadline, for example, like there is a deadline and it's feverish. Our off season just lacks that. Our off season also in Major League Baseball lacks any dead period. You know, you look at other major sports where they at least have like maybe a 1 month quiet period where nothing can happen. And I've always been an advocate for that. It'll probably happen now that I'm stepping away. But I think like everybody could benefit from that. I just feel like creating some crescendo with signings would be good for the game. I think the drag of the offseason is not good for the game. I think the old sort of strategy, if you will, was trying to always keep baseball in the paper, it being talked about. But I think the way people get their news, the way people follow things today, I don't think it's quite as relevant or as important. So I would be very much in favor of a dead period.
Are you feeling the ramifications of that? Like you said, like a deadline, a trade deadline.
Well, so like we have the winter warm-up this weekend, right? And every time I got a new iPhone, and so it always like, boop, 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 you know, like shows what's coming in. And I always look down and like I see an agent, and I'm like, oh, they're calling me to tell me so-and-so's not coming this weekend, right? So like that was my natural reaction. But no, they just have a list of like 10 guys they're trying to sign.
Oh,
so it's just sort of a weird weekend where I just quit. I just turned it over. But yeah, it's stressful.
Because the spring training's going to become that deadline with the absence of the deadline.
Right, but if you talk to most players, they always tell you like they would really like to know where they're going by January 1, right? For planning purposes, getting their living out situated, and it makes sense.
Mo, when you look at the National League right now, the way that the Dodgers, the Mets, there's like 5 teams right now that are spending more than $200 million on their payroll. How have things changed from when you took over as the GM of the Cardinals and their spot in the National League spending-wise? And I'm not like, it's not a criticism of the Cardinals, but when you look at what these bigger market clubs can now spend and the gap between them and the rest of the National League or the rest of the league in general, how does that affect how you view where the Cardinals stand in that?
So when you think about the arch of the last 30 years of baseball, I mean, there's always been some big players in terms of if they want to dictate the market or control the market, they can. I do think there have been new teams to emerge to join them. And then you also have a couple teams that seem to be in it sometimes and out of it the next year. And so there's that natural ebb and flow, but specifically about where does that fit with the Cardinals, you know, for 25 years, we've always been able to punch above our weight. Part of that was our fan base. Part of that was the TV deal we had, and we were always able to leverage that. But as these markets start to shift, clearly there are teams that are willing to invest even at a higher rate than maybe they were 15, 20 years ago. And so that competitive playing field is definitely getting more difficult to navigate. And I think, you know, in the end, you still see some teams with lower payrolls competing. You know, we're going to have to find that sweet spot between scouting, development, and then augmenting with the free agent market. But in terms of us ever operating like some of the teams you mentioned, I don't envision that happening.
All right, thank you, Mo.
All right, thank you guys.